The roar of an engine echoed through the quiet streets of Fairview, a town where dreams often rusted away like the old cars in Nick Dawson's garage. But tonight was different. When an elderly man named Frank Monroe rolled up in a 1969 Dodge Charger, battered by time but still carrying whispers of its past, Nick thought it was just another repair job. He was wrong, because hidden beneath the faded leather seats and rusted frame was a story waiting to be unraveled, a letter lost in time, a woman who had vanished without a trace, and a billionaire with a secret that could change everything. What started as fixing an old car would become a journey across decades, where love defied time, fate was rewritten, and some roads were never meant to be forgotten. Before we dive in, if you love stories that mix mystery, romance, and the magic of second chances, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This is one ride you don't want to miss. Now, let's begin. Nick Dawson wiped the grease from his hands and took a deep breath, stepping out of his cluttered auto shop into the crisp evening air. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a warm orange glow over the small town of Fairview. It was the kind of town where time seemed to move slower, where everyone knew everyone. Va noin hungiak mo thuong bibo lai fia sao nhun hung bay. Hat ku train jai radio. Nick had been here all his life. Once he had dreams of leaving, of doing something bigger. But life had a way of anchoring people in place. His father's passing had left him in charge of the family garage, and over the years the burden of responsibility had settled deep into his bones. That evening, just as he was about to close up shop, he heard the unmistakable rumble of an old engine rolling into his lot. It was deep, throaty, a sound from another time. When he turned, his breath caught in his throat. A 1969 Dodge Charger, battered and worn, rolled toward him, its once glorious midnight blue paint now faded and chipped. The headlights flickered weakly, and its chrome details bore the scars of time. It was a relic from an era of muscle cars and open highways, of speed and freedom. Behind the wheel sat an elderly man. His hands gripped the steering wheel as though it were the last piece of an old life he was unwilling to let go of. His eyes, sharp despite his years, met Nick's as he cut the engine. The man stepped out slowly, his posture stiff but controlled, like someone who was used to being in command. There was something about him, an air of quiet authority, the kind of presence that made Nick instinctively straighten his stance. "You work on classics?" the old man asked, his voice deep, measured. It carried weight, the kind that only comes from experience, or power. Nick wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "I work on anything with an engine, but this—" He ran a hand along the Charger's hood, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips. "This is something special." The man nodded. "Name's Frank Monroe." His tone was casual, but there was something else beneath it. A deliberate vagueness, like he was used to keeping things unsaid. "This car's been sitting in a barn for over 40 years. Thought it was about time someone brought it back to life." Nick felt a flicker of something. Curiosity, maybe even reverence. People didn't hold on to cars like this for no reason. "Why now?" he asked. Frank hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the setting sun. Then, finally, he said, "Because some things shouldn't be forgotten." Nick studied him. There was something more to this car than just nostalgia. He could feel it, but he knew better than to pry. Instead, he popped the hood and took a look. Inside, the engine was a mess, rusted, parts missing, wires frayed. This wasn't going to be an easy fix. "This is going to take time," Nick said, glancing back at Frank. "And money." Frank pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to him. Nick's eyebrows raised slightly as he took it. The envelope was thick, and the paper felt smooth, high quality, expensive. When he opened it, his breath hitched. More cash than he had ever seen for a single repair job. People didn't throw around this kind of money unless it meant something. Nick glanced back at Frank, suddenly more curious than before. "You must really love this car." Frank held his gaze for a moment. Then, with the ghost of a smile, he said, "Something like that." Nick knew there was more to it, but Frank wasn't offering details. "All right," Nick said, nodding. "I'll start tomorrow." Frank ran a hand over the Charger's roof, his fingers lingering as if saying goodbye. Then he turned to Nick. "One more thing," he said, his expression serious now. "If you find anything inside, leave it be." Nick frowned but nodded. That was an odd request. Frank gave one last look at the Charger, then walked away into the fading light. Later that night, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't just another job, Nick grabbed a flashlight and decided to take a closer look at the car. Sliding into the driver's seat, he inhaled the scent of aged leather and dust. He ran his fingers along the worn dashboard, picturing the life this car had seen. Who had driven it? Where had it been? He reached for the glove compartment and pulled it open. A faded Polaroid photograph tumbled onto the passenger seat. Nick picked it up. The image, though yellowed with time, was clear. A young woman stood next to the Charger, her hand resting on the hood. She had a playful smile, her dark curls tumbling over her shoulders, and she wore a summer dress that looked straight out of a 1970s catalog. Written in cursive on the back was a name, Evelyn Monroe. 1971. Nick stared at the name. Monroe. The same as Frank. His mind spun. Was she his wife? His sister? Or was there something else? The engine of the Charger suddenly let out a strange tick, a sound too distinct to ignore. Nick glanced at the dashboard. The keys weren't even in the ignition. A chill ran down his spine. Something about this car felt alive. Shaking the feeling, he turned back to the photograph. Who was Evelyn Monroe? And why did Frank seem so afraid of what he might find? Nick placed the photo back, exhaling slowly. Whatever secrets this car held, he had a feeling he was about to find out, and something told him his life would never be the same. The next morning, Nick Dawson arrived at his shop earlier than usual. The 1969 Dodge Charger sat in the center of the garage, bathed in the golden light of dawn. The events of the previous night still lingered in his mind. The photograph, the cryptic warning from Frank Monroe, and that eerie feeling when the engine had ticked on its own. Nick wasn't one to believe in ghosts, but something about this car unsettled him. It felt like it carried more than just rust and old memories, as if it had a story still unfinished. Shaking off the thought, he grabbed his tools and got to work. Nick started with the basics, checking the battery, inspecting the engine. As expected, the Charger was in bad shape. Most of its parts were either corroded or missing entirely. He leaned inside the car, reaching under the dashboard to check the wiring when his fingers brushed against something. A small, folded piece of yellowed paper was wedged deep in the glove compartment. Carefully, he pulled it out. It was another note, this one handwritten in faded ink. "If you find this, it means you were meant to. E.M." Nick frowned, reading the initials again. Evelyn Monroe. Just as he turned the note over, a sudden rush of dizziness hit him. The entire garage blurred and twisted as if reality itself were being pulled apart at the seams. His body felt weightless, like he was falling, yet he never hit the ground. And then, everything changed. Nick found himself standing outside, but it wasn't his garage. He was on a sunlit street, lined with vintage cars and brick storefronts. A warm summer breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby cafe. The sounds were different. No humming air conditioners, no modern traffic noise. Instead, he heard the smooth tunes of the Rolling Stones playing from a nearby radio, the laughter of kids riding their bikes, the distant chatter of townsfolk. Nick's heart pounded. This was not Fairview as he knew it. His gaze fell on the street corner where the Charger sat, pristine, untouched by time. Its midnight blue paint gleamed under the sun, the chrome sparkling like new. And then he saw her. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, leaned against the hood of the car, scribbling something into a small notebook. She had dark curls that cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face full of life. She wore a white summer dress that danced slightly in the breeze, and when she looked up, her eyes met his. Nick froze. Evelyn Monroe. She was the exact image from the photograph, alive and breathing before him. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with mild curiosity. "You look lost," she said, closing her notebook. Nick opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain that he had just fallen through time? Seeing his hesitation, Evelyn smiled. "Don't tell me. You just had your heart broken." "Didn't you?" she teased. Nick blinked. "What?" She motioned to his expression. "The way you're looking around like the world just knocked you off balance. Either you're lost, or you just realize love doesn't work the way it does in the movies." Nick exhaled, trying to think quickly. I guess you could say I wasn't expecting to be here." Evelyn grinned. "Well, lucky for you, Fairview's a good place to find yourself again." She turned toward the Charger and patted its hood affectionately. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Nick stepped closer, running a hand along the smooth metal. The car was immaculate, not a single dent or scratch. It was as if time had reversed itself completely. "This is your car?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "My father bought it for me last year. Best thing he ever did for me. Though he says I drive it too fast." Nick's stomach twisted. If this was 1971, that meant Frank Monroe, the old man who had brought the Charger, to his shop, was likely still a young man somewhere in town. Nick inhaled sharply, trying to suppress the overwhelming realization that he had, somehow, stepped into a past that wasn't his. "So," Evelyn said, leaning against the car with a curious smile, "are you new in town, or are you just passing through?" Nick hesitated. He couldn't exactly tell her the truth, that he had traveled here from the future. "Just passing through," he finally said. Evelyn nodded as if she understood something deeper than his words. "You don't belong here, do you?" Nick swallowed hard. "Not exactly." She studied him for a moment before smiling. "Well, if you're just passing through, then you ought to see Fairview the right way." She slid into the driver's seat and patted the passenger side. "Come on, let's go for a ride." Nick hesitated only for a moment before climbing in. The engine roared to life with a power that he hadn't heard in decades. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. As Evelyn shifted gears and pulled onto the road, Nick glanced at her hands gripping the wheel. They were steady, confident, like she belonged behind the wheel of this car. The summer wind rushed through the open windows, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint aroma of a distant barbecue. For a moment, as they drove through the golden countryside, Nick forgot about the impossibility of what had happened. He forgot that he wasn't supposed to be here. He forgot that this moment, this laughter, this stolen piece of time was something fragile. Because in that moment, sitting beside Evelyn Monroe in the summer of 1971, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Alive. As they drove, Nick stole another glance at Evelyn. She was laughing, at something on the radio, carefree and full of light. But deep down, a thought nagged at him. If I'm here, does that mean I can change what happens to her? He didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was certain. Frank Monroe had brought that Charger to his shop for a reason. And now he had been thrown into this moment for a reason too. What if he wasn't just here to witness the past? What if he was here to change it? The summer air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and gasoline as Evelyn Monroe sped down the open road, her hands gripping the wheel of the 1969 Dodge Charger with the confidence of someone who belonged behind it. Nick Dawson sat in, the passenger seat, still grappling with the impossible reality that had swallowed him whole. He was in 1971. He had somehow stepped into a past that wasn't his, sitting beside a woman who, by all logic, should have been nothing more than a memory. Evelyn let out a laugh as the wind whipped through her hair. "You sure are quiet for someone who just got the ride of his life." Nick forced a smile. "Just taking it all in." And he was. The old-school billboards, the vintage storefronts, the way people on the street waved as they passed, everything was a perfectly preserved snapshot of a world long gone. It was surreal. But something deeper gnawed at him. He knew Evelyn's name. He had seen her face before, in Frank Monroe's Charger in that old photograph from 1971, which meant she was running out of time. Evelyn pulled the Charger into a gravel lot beside a small roadside diner, the kind with neon signs and red vinyl booths. She killed the engine and leaned back in her seat with a satisfied grin. "You hungry?" she asked. Nick hesitated. He hadn't exactly thought about food, but now that she mentioned it, the idea of stepping further into this version of reality felt like another step away from the life he had left behind. Still, he nodded. "Yeah, I could eat." Inside, the diner was alive with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the familiar twang of a country song playing from the jukebox. Evelyn slid into a booth by the window, motioning for Nick to sit across from her. A waitress, no older than 20, popped her gum as she pulled out a notepad. "What'll it be, sugar?" Evelyn didn't even look at the menu. 2 cheeseburgers, extra pickles, and a chocolate shake to split. Nick raised an eyebrow. "You order for all your dates?" Evelyn smirked. "Only the ones who look lost." Nick shook his head, but there was something about her, something effortless and magnetic. She had an ease about her, a kind of quiet rebellion that he couldn't ignore. But he wasn't here for casual conversation. He needed answers. "So," he started, trying to sound casual. "Monroe, that's your last name?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "That's usually how last names work, yeah," Nick exhaled, debating his next words carefully. "Your family live here in town?" She shrugged. "My dad does. Runs the hardware store. Good man, but old-fashioned. Wants me to settle down, marry some rich guy who'll take care of me." Nick stiffened. This lined up too well with what Frank had told him in the present. Evelyn sighed, stirring the straw in her water glass. "I love him. But he doesn't get it. He thinks a woman's future is written before she even has a chance to pick up the pen." She glanced at Nick then, her expression softer. "I don't want to be somebody's pretty wife sitting in a house that doesn't feel like home." Nick swallowed. She had no idea how much her future had already been written, and suddenly an idea hit him. "What if you left?" he asked. Evelyn blinked. "What?" "What if you just drove? Took the Charger and got out of here?" For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a spark of something reckless, something desperate. But then it faded just as quickly. She let out a small laugh. "That's a nice thought, stranger. But running isn't as easy as it sounds." Nick knew she wasn't just talking about leaving town, she was talking about leaving a life that had already been chosen for her. When they finished eating, Evelyn drove Nick back to where she had first picked him up. The sun was setting now, casting a golden glow over Fairview, turning the Charger's midnight blue paint almost purple in the dimming light. Nick stepped out, unsure of what to say. Evelyn leaned against the car, watching him carefully. "You're a mystery, you know." "That?" Nick smirked. "That's so." She nodded. "Something tells me you didn't just wander into town by accident." He swallowed hard, because she wasn't wrong. Before he could respond, Evelyn reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, sealed manila envelope. She hesitated, then handed it to him. "What's this?" Nick asked. Evelyn exhaled. "I don't know. My dad left it in the car for me last week. told me not to open it until I was ready. Nick felt a chill creep down his spine. "Why are you giving it to me?" he asked carefully. Evelyn met his gaze. "Because I think you're supposed to see it." Nick hesitated, but then, before he could say anything else, his vision swam again. The world tilted, the light flickered, and just like that, he was gone. Nick gasped as he shot upright, the sound of modern-day Fairview slamming back into his ears. He was back. The Charger sat in front of him in its old rusted state. The diner, the neon lights, the world of 1971, all gone. His hands trembled as he looked down. The envelope was still there, and when he turned it over, his blood ran cold. Because the writing on the front said, "For Nick Dawson," his own name. A message, left for him in the past. A message that had somehow made it back to the future. Nick's pulse pounded in his ears. Evelyn knew he was coming. Somehow, some way. She had known, and if she had left him a message across time, it meant he hadn't just been a visitor in her world. It meant he had changed something, and that meant he could change more. Nick gripped the envelope, his breath shaky. Evelyn Monroe's fate wasn't set in stone, not if he had anything to do with it. Nick Dawson sat in the dim light of his garage, the envelope still clutched in his hands. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he turned it over, fingers tracing the edges of the aged paper. For Nick Dawson. How? Evelyn had written this decades ago, before she ever knew he existed, and yet here it was, real and tangible in his grasp. He inhaled deeply and carefully peeled open the flap. Inside was a single folded letter, the ink slightly smudged but still legible. "Nick, if you're reading this, it means time works in ways we'll never fully understand. It means I was right about you, and it means I have a choice to make. I don't know how or why you ended up in my life, but I know that you weren't just passing through. There are moments that shape us, forks in the road that decide everything. I think I'm standing at one now, and somehow I think you are too, but if I make the wrong choice, I hope you'll find a way to set things right." "Evelyn," Nick exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. She knew something had been set in motion, something bigger than both of them. And she had left him this letter, not knowing if he would ever read it, not knowing if he would ever return. His grip tightened. He couldn't just sit here. If time had given him a door, he had to step through it. There was unfinished business in 1971, and he was going back. Nick grabbed his jacket, shoved the letter into his pocket, and slid into the driver's seat of the Charger. His hands gripped the wheel, heart pounding. He had no idea how this worked, no idea why the Charger was the key. But he knew one thing. This car was a bridge, and if it had taken him once, it would take him again. He took a deep breath, pressed his foot to the gas, and the world blurred. The air around him crackled, the lights in the garage flickered, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Nick gasped, gripping the wheel as the Charger screeched onto the road, except it wasn't the road he'd left behind. The sun was shining. The pavement was smooth. The rusted, time-worn dashboard was pristine again. He was back. Nick pulled over, his hands still shaking. The world outside was moving like nothing had changed, like he had never left. And then he saw her. Evelyn Monroe stood outside a small grocery store, holding a bag of apples, laughing with the store clerk. The sight of her, so real, so alive, hit him harder than he expected. Nick swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't belong in this time. But for some reason, fate had pushed him here, and he wasn't going to waste it. Evelyn spotted him before he could say anything. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "You came back," she said simply. Nick exhaled. "I guess I did." Evelyn studied him, as if weighing her next words carefully. Then, with an easy confidence, she motioned toward the Charger. "You want to go for a drive?" Nick let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I do." They climbed into the car, and as Evelyn pulled onto the open road, Nick felt it again, that impossible feeling of belonging to something that shouldn't exist. But here they were. And somehow, they both knew it. They drove for miles, past golden fields and rolling hills, the Charger humming beneath them. Nick wanted to tell her everything. About the future, about what might happen, about how he had found her letter, her warning. But would she believe him? Would it even change anything? Instead, he asked, "What would you do if you could go anywhere?" Evelyn glanced at him, her fingers tightening on the wheel. "Anywhere." Nick nodded. "If nothing held you back." She exhaled, considering. "I'd go west, to California, maybe even overseas, just somewhere new, somewhere I can start fresh." Nick watched her carefully. "What's stopping you?" Evelyn let out a small laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know what's stopping me. Her father, her arranged future, her fate." Nick turned his gaze toward the road. He could tell her everything now, warn her about what was coming, or he could do something more, something that mattered. Nick made up his mind in an instant. "You should do it," he said. "Leave, take the Charger and just go." Evelyn blinked. "You keep saying that like it's that simple." Nick held her gaze. "Maybe it is." For a long moment, they drove in silence. The sun was setting now, casting streaks of amber and violet across the sky. And then, softly, Evelyn asked, "Why do you care so much?" Nick hesitated. He had no answer she would understand. Not yet, so instead he said, "Because some roads shouldn't lead to dead ends." Evelyn didn't reply, but her grip on the wheel tightened just a little. As they drove back toward town, Nick knew one thing. He had planted a seed, a thought, a possibility, and maybe, just maybe, that was all it took to rewrite a fate that had already been written. Because time wasn't just a straight road, and neither was love. The hum of the 1969 Dodge Charger filled the silence between them as Evelyn guided it back toward Fairview. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of deep orange and purple in the sky. Nick Dawson sat in the passenger seat, stealing glances at her as she drove. She was thinking. He could see it. The seed had been planted. He had told her to leave, to take the Charger and escape a life that wasn't hers to live. But the weight of that decision pressed against her like an invisible force. Nick knew it wasn't that simple. But he also knew she had to make a choice, and time was running out. They pulled into the gravel lot outside the Monroe family estate. A stately house, elegant but imposing, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Evelyn cut the engine and let out a breath, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before turning to him. "You keep saying I should leave," she said. "That I should just take off like it's easy." Nick met her gaze. "It's not easy, but that doesn't mean it's not right." She exhaled, shaking her head. "You don't get it. My father has plans, big ones, and he doesn't take no for an answer." Nick clenched his jaw. "That's not a plan, that's a prison." Evelyn looked away, fingers drumming against the wheel. "Maybe," she admitted, then, almost as an afterthought, "but sometimes it's easier to stay locked up than to break free and risk everything." Nick's stomach twisted. He wanted to shake her, to make her understand that this wasn't just about some overbearing father or a forced marriage. This was about her life. He had seen the future. He had seen the way Frank Monroe, her future son, had looked at that Charger with sadness and regret. Whatever happened, Evelyn hadn't escaped, but she still had a chance. "Listen to me," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't know what happens if you stay, but I know you don't want that life." Evelyn studied him carefully. And then, before either of them could say another word, the front door of the house swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Nick could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his presence commanded attention. Evelyn's father, Richard Monroe. And he didn't look pleased. Richard's eyes landed on the charger, then drifted to Nick. A stranger. Evelyn stiffened beside him. "Stay here," she muttered before climbing out of the car. Nick gritted his teeth but obeyed, watching as she approached her father. "You were supposed to be home hours ago," Richard said, his voice low but firm. Evelyn folded her arms. "I went for a drive." "With who?" Richard's gaze flickered toward Nick. Evelyn hesitated. "Just a friend." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've talked about this, Evelyn. You have responsibilities, a future already set in motion." Nick watched the exchange, fists tightening. A future already set in motion. Just words. Words that had kept her trapped for decades. "I can make my own choices," Evelyn said, but there was an edge of hesitation in her voice. Richard exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Enough of this rebellion. I won't tolerate it." Then his voice lowered, dangerously controlled. "You are marrying Charles Whitmore. End of discussion." Nick flinched. That name. Frank had mentioned it once. The man, Evelyn, was forced to marry. And suddenly, it all made sense. This was the moment. This was the decision she had written about in the letter. She was at the fork in the road, standing between freedom and a fate she had never wanted. And she was hesitating. Nick's chest tightened. If he didn't act now, history would repeat itself. Nick pushed open the car door and stepped out, ignoring the way Richard Monroe's eyes darkened at the sight of him. He wasn't here to win favor. He was here to change everything. "She doesn't have to marry him," Nick said, his voice steady. "She has a choice." Richard turned to him slowly, as if acknowledging his presence for the first time. "And you are?" Nick swallowed. "Someone who sees her for who she really is." A tense silence filled the air. Evelyn looked between them, caught between two forces, the father who had controlled her life and the stranger who had come from nowhere and told her she could change it. Finally, Richard let out a humorless chuckle. "You think this is about love?" He turned to Evelyn. "This is about survival, about securing your place in the world." Evelyn's hands balled into fists at her sides. "My place isn't in someone else's shadow." Richard's jaw clenched. "Enough." Nick stepped closer. "You don't own her," he said, voice low. "And if you force her into this marriage, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." A flicker of something crossed Richard's face. Doubt? Uncertainty? Evelyn exhaled, turning to Nick. "If I leave, what happens next?" Nick's heart pounded. "Whatever you want. A real life. Not just what someone else planned for you." A long silence stretched between them. And then, Evelyn took the keys out of her pocket. She turned to her father, shoulders squared. "I'm leaving." Richard's face darkened. "Evelyn." She didn't let him finish. Before he could say another word, she turned, climbed into the charger, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life. Nick barely had time to register what was happening before she grabbed his wrist and yanked him into the passenger seat. And then, they were gone. The tires kicked up dust, headlights cutting through. The night as Evelyn tore down the open highway. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Finally, Evelyn let out a breathless laugh. "Well, stranger, looks like you got what you wanted." Nick turned to her, heart still racing. "What do you want?" Evelyn gripped the wheel, staring straight ahead. "For the first time," she said softly. She pressed the gas pedal a little. Harder? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Nick leaned back in his seat, the weight of the future still heavy on his shoulders. Because this wasn't over. Time wasn't finished with them yet. The 1969 Dodge Charger tore down the open highway, its engine roaring against the silence of the night. Nick Dawson sat in the passenger seat, his heart still hammering from what had just happened. Evelyn Monroe had done it. She had left. The weight of the moment pressed against him as he stole a glance at her. She looked determined, her fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, her gaze locked on the road ahead. But beneath that confidence, Nick could see it, the lingering fear, the uncertainty. She had broken free, but now she was facing something just as terrifying. The unknown. They had been driving for nearly an hour, the town of Fairview now just a collection of distant lights in the rearview mirror. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the dark, the only sound between them the steady hum of the Charger's engine. Finally, Nick spoke. "You okay?" Evelyn exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "I should be. Shouldn't I?" Nick leaned back in his seat, studying her. "You just walked away from your entire life. It's okay if you don't have all the answers yet." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it? I don't have answers, just questions." Nick turned to her. "Like what?" She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Like, what the hell am I supposed to do now?" Nick sighed. He had pushed her to leave. He had told her she had a choice, but now that she had taken it, she was untethered, floating in a space where nothing was certain. He knew that feeling well. "Maybe that's the best part," he said. "You get to decide." Evelyn didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached over and turned on the radio, the crackling static soon giving way to the smooth voice of a DJ introducing the next song. A soft, melancholic tune filled the car, one of those songs that felt like a memory, even if you'd never heard it before. Evelyn's grip on the wheel relaxed slightly. For a moment, they just drove. Two strangers running from time. Nick pulled out the folded letter from his pocket, the one Evelyn had written for him before she had even known him. The words still sent a chill down his spine. "I don't know how or why you ended up in my life, but I know that you weren't just passing through." He glanced at Evelyn again. Had she known, on some level, that she was meant to leave? Was that why she had trusted him so easily? Finally, she sighed. "We can't drive. Forever." Nick nodded. "So, where do you want to go?" She gave a small, almost amused shrug. "I always wanted to see the ocean." Nick raised an eyebrow. "The ocean?" Evelyn glanced at him. "You ever seen it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not in the way you're thinking." Her lips curled into a small smile. "Then that settles it. We drive until we see." "Water?" Nick smirked. "That's not exactly a solid plan." Evelyn shot him a sideways glance. "You're the one who told me to just go." Nick exhaled, running a hand through his hair. She wasn't wrong. The problem was, he didn't know how much time they had left. It started with the headlights flickering. At first, Nick thought it was just a trick of the road, an old car with old wiring, maybe a loose connection. But then the radio stuttered, the music distorting into something warped, something unnatural. Evelyn frowned. "Did you hear that?" Nick's stomach twisted. He knew that sound. He had heard it before the first time he had traveled back. Time was shifting again. Then, without warning, the engine died. The Charger lurched forward, momentum carrying them a few extra feet before coming to a complete stop on the side of the road. Silence. The streetlights ahead flickered, casting long, stretching shadows against the pavement. The wind outside had picked up, rustling the trees lining the road. Nick's pulse pounded. This wasn't normal. Evelyn cursed under her breath and tried to start the car again, turning the key in the ignition. Nothing. Damn it, she muttered, hitting the wheel in frustration. Of all the times for this thing to break down. Nick wasn't so sure this was just a breakdown. He stepped out of the car, scanning the empty road, the darkened trees. Something felt wrong. Then he noticed it. The sky. The stars weren't moving, not in the way they should be. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but something about the night felt stuck like a paused frame in a film. Nick turned back to Evelyn. "We need to get out of here." She frowned. "What? Why?" Nick hesitated. He couldn't explain it. Not yet, but deep in his gut, he knew something was happening. Something was trying to pull him back. Evelyn climbed out of the car, rapping, her arms around herself against the sudden chill in the air. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I leave my father behind, break free for the first time in my life, and the damn car dies." Nick exhaled. "It's not just the car." He looked up at him then, and something in his tone must have caught her attention because her expression softened. "What's really going on here?" she asked. Nick opened his mouth, then closed it. How did he even begin to explain that he wasn't from here, that he had seen her future, or at least the future where she never left, that the world was literally trying to pull him back, like an elastic band stretched too far? She wouldn't believe him. Hell, he barely believed it himself. So instead, he said, "I don't think we have as much time as we thought." Evelyn frowned, her gaze searching his. "What does that mean?" Nick hesitated. Then, carefully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter, the one she had written him before she had ever met him. Evelyn's brow furrowed as she took it, and as she unfolded the page and read her own handwriting, her own words from a future she hadn't lived yet, her breath hitched. She looked up at him, eyes wide with realization. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Nick exhaled, the mykne, truth. Evelyn swallowed hard, fingers trembling against the paper. For the first time, she had proof that her future wasn't set in stone. And for the first time, Nick realized that maybe, just maybe, neither was his. Evelyn Monroe stood motionless on the side of the road, her hands trembling as she held the letter. Her letter. The words on the aged paper, written in ink she had never touched, sent a shiver down her spine. Nick Dawson watched her carefully, knowing this was the moment everything changed. She finally lifted her gaze, her breath shallow. This isn't possible." Nick exhaled, his hands resting on the charger's roof. "I know." Evelyn's eyes darted between him and the letter. "But it's my handwriting. It's my words." She swallowed hard. "How the hell do you have a letter from me that I never wrote?" Nick hesitated. He had spent so much time trying to avoid this conversation, trying to steer her toward the right decision without revealing the truth. But now, the truth was staring her in the face. He couldn't run from it anymore. Taking a slow step forward, he said, "Because you did write it." Evelyn let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "No, I didn't. I've never seen this letter before in my life." Nick nodded. "Not yet." Silence stretched between them. Evelyn gripped the paper tightly, her fingers curling, around the edges like it might vanish if she let go. "I don't understand." Nick exhaled. "Because it hasn't happened yet." Her expression twisted in confusion, frustration. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know," Nick admitted, "and I wish I could explain it in a way that does." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to piece together the right words. "I don't know how it works exactly. All I know is that I'm not supposed to be here. And this," he gestured, "to the letter. This means that time isn't as set as we think it is." Evelyn took a step back, shaking her head. "No, that's crazy. You're saying—" "What? That you're from the future?" Nick met her gaze. Yes. A beat of silence. Then she laughed, not a joyful laugh, a bitter, disbelieving, this can't be real kind of laugh. Right. And I suppose you have a flying car parked somewhere too? Nick sighed. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Evelyn pressed her fingers to her temples. Because it's insane, Nick. People don't just show up from the future. Nick let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah? Well, people don't usually write letters to men they haven't met yet either. Evelyn froze. He had her. The disbelief in her eyes wavered, shifting into something else. Fear, because deep down she knew he was right. She had no explanation for the letter, and neither did he. The wind had picked up, the night air biting against Nick's skin. He looked up at the sky. The stars were still wrong, still unnaturally frozen as if time itself was flickering between two realities. Something was happening, and it wasn't just about them. Nick turned back to Evelyn. Listen to me. I don't know how much time I have left here. Evelyn's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to protest, but no words came. Nick continued. I came back because of that charger, because of you, and I think I changed something. Evelyn's grip on the letter tightened. Changed what? Nick hesitated. He had no way of knowing what would happen now, but he did know one thing. I know that, before this. You never left Fairview. Evelyn's breath hitched. How do you? Nick cut her off. Because in the future, your son, Frank Monroe, was the one who gave me this car. Evelyn's face drained of color. My son? Nick nodded slowly. And when I met him, he told me that this charger, your charger, was all he had left of you. A thick silence settled over them, the weight of Nick's words pressing down like a heavy fog. Evelyn's lips trembled, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you telling me that I... She swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. Nick didn't look away. I don't know what happens to you, Evelyn, but I know that you never got out. Evelyn staggered back, her entire world shifting. Beneath her feet. She looked at the charger, then at Nick, then at the letter in her hands. And then, finally, she whispered, I'm not supposed to be here either. Am I? Nick exhaled, relief washing over him. She was starting to understand. But before he could say anything else, the charger's headlights flickered again. And this time, Nick felt it. The pull. A deep, undeniable tugging sensation in his chest, like an unseen force trying to drag him away. Evelyn saw it too. Nick stumbled, gripping the edge of the car to steady himself. It was happening again. Time was shifting, and this time it was pulling him back. Evelyn rushed forward, grabbing his arm. Nick, what's happening? Nick gritted his teeth. I think I'm being pulled back. Evelyn's eyes widened. No, not now. You have to tell me more. Nick shook his head. I don't think I can stop it. Evelyn's breath came faster, panic setting in. Nick, I don't... Nick grabbed her shoulders, looking her dead in the eyes. You have to leave. Evelyn shook her head violently. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do. Nick squeezed her arms. You already knew when you wrote that letter. Evelyn's breath hitched. You have to go, Evelyn, Nick urged. Tonight, before it's too late. She stared at him, torn between disbelief and the growing realization that everything he was saying was true. And then, Nick felt it, that final pull, stronger than before. The world around him blurred, Evelyn's face distorting as if time itself was unraveling. She gripped his hand. Nick, I'll find you, he swore. No matter what happens, I'll find you. Evelyn gasped, her eyes shining with something more than fear. And then, he was gone. Nick's body slammed against the floor of his garage. He gasped for air his vision swimming as the scent of oil and rust filled his lungs. For a moment, he just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to ground himself. Then, the realization hit. He was back. In his time. Nick sat up, heart racing. The charger sat before him, the same old rusted version he'd been working on before all of this began. Had he changed anything? Was Evelyn still trapped in Fairview's past? Nick's pulse pounded as he scrambled to his feet. He had to know. Had she made it? Had she left? And if she had, where was she now? Nick Dawson sat motionless on the cold concrete floor of his garage, his breath still ragged from the violent pull of time. The world around him was steady again. No flickering lights, no distorted sounds, no sense of shifting reality. He was back. His heart pounded as he turned his gaze toward the 1969 Dodge Charger. It was no longer the gleaming masterpiece of 1971. It was old again, rust creeping along its edges, paint faded with time. Had it worked? Had Evelyn left? He pushed himself, up and staggered toward the car, his hands shaking as he ran them along the hood. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. If she had listened to him, if she had really left Fairview that night, then the future should have changed. And if it had, there had to be proof. Something. Anything. His eyes scanned, the car's interior desperate for a sign. Then he saw it. A small, aged envelope tucked neatly beneath the steering wheel as if it had been waiting for him. Nick's chest tightened. He reached for it with trembling fingers, knowing before he even unfolded it that it belonged to her. Evelyn. Nick tore the envelope open, his pulse hammering in his ears as he unfolded the yellowed paper inside. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Nick, if you're reading this, then time kept its promise. I made it out. I left Fairview that night, just like you told me to. I drove until the road felt like home, until the past was nothing more than a town in my rearview mirror. And somehow, I knew I'd find a way to let you know. I don't know where you are, now, or if I'll ever see you again. But I need you to know this. You changed everything. You were right. My life wasn't written in stone. And neither is yours. I'll be waiting, Nick. Find me. Evelyn, Nick inhaled sharply, his hands gripping the letter as a wave of emotion crashed into him. She had done it. She had escaped. She had rewritten the future, and somehow, some way, she had left him this letter across time, just as she had before. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of it all. Evelyn Monroe was alive, somewhere out there, and she was waiting for him. Nick's grip on the letter tightened. He had spent so long thinking that fate was unchangeable, that the past had already cemented itself into something unmovable. But now he had proof that wasn't true. Evelyn had listened to him. She had chosen a different path, and now he had to find her. But how? She could be anywhere. If she had truly left Fairview that night, she would have built a different life, one with no ties to the town, no traces of the fate she had once been. Trapped in. Nick's mind spun with possibilities. She had told him she wanted to see the ocean. Could she have gone west? Had she followed through on that dream? He looked down at the letter again, rereading the final words. I'll be waiting, Nick. Find me. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a hope. It was a certainty. She had known he would come looking, and she had left him a trail to follow. Nick swallowed hard. He had to start somewhere, and he knew exactly where to begin. Then, an idea struck him. The Charger. If Evelyn had taken the car and built a life elsewhere, she might have left behind a record of it. But before he could act, something else caught his eye. A second envelope. This one newer, tucked neatly in the glove compartment. Frowning, Nick reached for it and pulled it open. Inside was a business Card, sleek, modern, elegant in its simplicity. The name printed on it made his breath hitch. Frank Monroe. Below the name, in embossed gold lettering, was a company name that Nick instantly recognized: Monroe Industries. Nick's pulse quickened. Frank had never mentioned this. The man who had walked into his garage, the old man with the charger, he wasn't just some aging car owner. He was a billionaire. Nick clenched his jaw, staring at the card. How had he not seen it before? Frank Monroe had sent him on this journey. But why? What did he know? And more importantly, had he been waiting for Nick to figure it out? Nick dug through his workshop until he found a dusty box of old maps. The kind his father used to keep before GPS made them obsolete. He spread them out over his workbench, scanning them under the dim garage light. If Evelyn had left in 1971, where would she have gone? Her last words to him before he vanished echoed in his mind. I always wanted to see the ocean. The West Coast. Nick's fingers traced the highways leading out of Fairview, following the paths she might have taken. There weren't many major roads back then. If she had driven toward California, she would have followed Route 66 at some point. It was a long shot, but it was something. Then he remembered the Charger's registration. Nick grabbed his laptop and pulled up a national vehicle. Registry database, his hands moving quickly over the keyboard. With a deep breath, he entered the Charger's original VIN number. And then, a hit. Nick's heart nearly stopped as a record appeared on the screen. The Charger had been registered in California. By E. Monroe. Nick let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She had really done it. She had gone west, and now he had a way to find her. But there was one more thing. Beneath Evelyn's name on the registry, there was another signature. Frank Monroe. Nick stared at the screen, his mind racing. Frank had known, all along, but why hadn't he told him? The answer was waiting for him. Nick didn't waste time. He grabbed his jacket, packed a bag, and climbed into the driver's seat of the 1969 Dodge Charger, her car, the same car that had carried her to freedom 5 decades ago. He gripped the wheel, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fixing a broken engine. He was fixing something far greater. He was chasing something that was never supposed to exist. But it did. And he was going to find it. Nick took one last look at the garage, the place where his life had split into 2 timelines. Then he turned the key. The engine roared to life just as it had all those years ago. Nick smirked. It was time to find Evelyn Monroe. Nick Dawson gripped the steering wheel of the 1969 Dodge Charger, the hum of the engine filling the silent night. The neon glow of Fairview faded in his rearview mirror as he sped down the open highway. Evelyn Monroe was alive, and he was going to find her. The address linked to the car's registration placed her somewhere in California, but the information was old, decades old. He didn't know if she still lived there or if she had moved on, disappearing into another life. But it was his only lead, and if there was even the slightest chance she was waiting for him, he had to take it. He shifted gears, pressing the gas. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of possibility. Just like her. For the next 2 days, Nick barely stopped. He drove through dusty highways and nameless towns, following the old Route 66, just as he imagined Evelyn had done when she left Fairview all those years ago. The radio crackled with old tunes, songs that made him think of her, how she had laughed behind the wheel, how she had looked at the open road like it was the beginning of something new. It felt like he was retracing her steps, like he was chasing a ghost that had left behind whispers of a life that might have been. At night, he slept in roadside motels, the worn-out beds and flickering signs reminding him just how far from home he was. But Evelyn was home now, and he was getting closer. Nick reached California on the 3rd day. He found himself in a small coastal town just outside of Santa Cruz, where the Charger's last registration had been filed. The place had the charm of old California. Quaint cafes, surf shops, and quiet beaches stretching along the cliffs. It was exactly the kind of place he could imagine Evelyn escaping to. He parked the Charger outside a public records office. His hands sweaty as he pushed through the doors. A middle-aged woman with thick glasses sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. She barely looked up when he approached. Nick cleared his throat. "I'm looking for someone. I was hoping. You might have some records." The woman sighed, setting down her magazine. "Name?" Nick hesitated before speaking. "Evelyn Monroe." The woman frowned slightly, typing into an old computer. The minutes stretched painfully as Nick clenched his fists, waiting. Then, her eyes flicked to the screen and something in her expression shifted. Nick's pulse spiked. "You found something?" The woman hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, Evelyn Monroe. She owned a house here, but it was sold a few years back." Nick swallowed. "Do you know where she went?" The woman shook her head. "No forwarding address. Just says the property was transferred to an estate." Nick's stomach dropped. An estate, that could only mean one thing. His hands trembled slightly as he asked, She's gone, isn't she?" The woman softened a little, seeing something in his expression that made her hesitate. "I don't." "No, honey," she said gently. "But if you're looking for someone who knew her, you might try the cafe on the pier. That's where she used to go all the time." Nick exhaled slowly, nodding. "Thanks." His chest ached as he turned away. Had he come all this way just to be too late? As he stepped out into the California sun, Nick pulled out the business card. He had found in the Charger, Frank Monroe, Monroe Industries. The more he thought about it, the more it nagged at him. Why had Frank given him this exact car? Had he known Evelyn was still out there? And if he did, why hadn't he said anything? Nick clenched his jaw. There was more to this than just a lost love story, and he was going to find out what Frank Monroe had been hiding all these years. Nick parked near the pier, stepping out into the cool California breeze. The ocean stretched wide before him, waves crashing against the shore. This was where she had wanted to be. He ran a hand over his face, trying to push down the disappointment curling in his stomach. He had traveled across time, across an entire country, to find her. And now, she might be just another memory lost to the past. Still, he forced himself. Forward. The cafe on the pier was small and quiet, filled with the scent of salt and fresh coffee. A few locals sat at the bar, chatting about the waves and the morning catch. Nick slid onto a stool, his mind racing. He was about to give up when the radio behind the counter crackled to life. And then, a song played. Nick froze. It was the same song that had played the night he and Evelyn had driven out of Fairview, the same song that had filled the Charger as they raced toward freedom. His breath hitched. It was an old tune, one that shouldn't have meant anything, except it did, and someone had chosen it. Nick turned, scanning the cafe. And then he saw her. She was sitting by the window staring out at the ocean. Her hair was lighter now, streaked with silver and sun-kissed strands. There were soft lines around her eyes, but they didn't dull the warmth in them. She looked exactly like Evelyn Monroe should look after 5 decades of living a life that was finally hers. Nick's heart stopped. She was here. Alive. Evelyn Monroe had made it. And now, she was waiting for him. His throat went dry. His feet felt rooted to the floor. Then, as if sensing him, she turned. Her eyes met his. And just like that, time folded in on itself again. It was 1971. It was now. It was everything in between. Evelyn stared at him, shock flashing across her face, before softening into something else, something unspoken. recognition. She knew. Nick took a slow step forward, his hands shaking at his sides. He had spent so long chasing time, trying to rewrite fate. But maybe, just maybe, fate had been waiting for him all along. Evelyn blinked, her breath catching. Then she whispered, "Took you long enough." Nick laughed. Because for the first time in a long, long time, he had finally found his way home. Nick Dawson stood frozen in the doorway of the cafe, his heart pounding like the rhythm of an old familiar song. Evelyn Monroe was real. She was here, and she had been waiting for him. The years had touched her, soft lines around her eyes, silver threading through her dark hair, but the fire in her gaze, the same rebellious spark he had known in 1971, was still there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn let out a small, breathless laugh. "Well, I'll be damned." Nick swallowed hard, stepping forward. "You remember me?" It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the ceramic coffee cup in front of her. "How could I forget?" Her voice was softer now, threaded with something Nick couldn't quite name. Relief? Disbelief? She motioned to the seat across from her. "You just gonna stand there, Dawson, or are you finally gonna sit down?" Nick let out a short laugh, half in shock, half in awe, and slid into the seat. The cafe, the ocean outside, the quiet murmur of voices in the background, none of it felt real. Only her. Only this. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nick searched, her face looking for answers, for explanations. But Evelyn was the first to break the silence. "I always wondered if I'd see you again," she admitted, stirring the spoon in her coffee. "Didn't think it'd take you 50 years, though." Nick exhaled a laugh, shaking his head. "It wasn't exactly a straight road." Evelyn smirked, but then her expression softened. "It really was you, wasn't it?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Back in 1971, you weren't just some guy passing through." Nick leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "No," he said quietly. "I wasn't." Evelyn studied him, eyes sharp. "And the letter?" Nick pulled it from his pocket, placing it gently between them. The paper was old, fragile with time, but her handwriting was still clear. Evelyn hesitated before picking it up, running her fingers over the faded ink. "I wrote this," she murmured, almost to herself. "I remember writing it, but I didn't know who it was for." She looked up at him, something raw and aching in her expression. "I was writing to a ghost, and all this time, I thought I was just talking to myself." Nick swallowed, his throat tight. "You weren't." Evelyn let out a breath, shaking her head. "And yet, here you are." Nick searched her face, his heart racing. "Tell me everything," he said. "Tell me what happened after I left." Evelyn hesitated, then placed the letter down, her fingers lingering on it for a moment before she met his gaze. "I left," she said simply. Nick felt a wave of something. Relief, gratitude, something deeper than either of those things. "I drove west like I always said I would. I got to California, worked whatever jobs I could find, slept in that Charger more nights than I care to admit." She smiled slightly, lost in the memory. "But it was mine. My life. For the first time, I was free." Nick exhaled, nodding. "And Frank?" Evelyn's smile faltered. She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I met someone," she said. "Not Charles. Someone else." Nick's stomach tightened. She glanced at him. "It wasn't love. Not really. But I think I wanted to prove to myself that I could choose my own life, that I could be in control of something." Nick nodded slowly. "And Frank?" Evelyn smiled, but there was something wistful in it. "He was the best thing I ever did. He grew up knowing that his mother had built something for herself, that she wasn't just someone's wife. I told him that if he ever wanted something, really wanted something, he should fight for it. Her eyes flickered back to Nick. Guess that's why he found you. Nick felt his chest tighten. Frank Monroe, the man who had given him the charger, the man who had set this whole journey in motion. He hadn't just been looking for a mechanic. He had been looking for the missing piece of his mother's story. And somehow, in ways neither of them could have predicted, that car had led Nick back to her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Nick wasn't sure what to say. There was so much history between them, tangled and impossible, stretching across decades. Finally, Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. So tell me, Nick Dawson, what the hell are we supposed to do now? Nick exhaled. He could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. Time had torn them apart, and now, somehow, it had brought them back together. He thought about the long road that had led him here, about the choices they had both made, the years that had passed. But then, he thought about the charger, about that night in 1971, about the way she had smiled behind the wheel, free and full of light, and suddenly, he knew. Nick leaned forward, his voice steady. Let's go. Evelyn blinked. Go where? Nick smiled. Wherever you want. She stared at him for a long moment, then let out a small laugh. Half disbelief, half something else. Something like hope. Then, slowly, she shook her head, amusement in her eyes. You're serious? Nick shrugged. You were always meant to be on the road, Evelyn. Maybe I was, too. A slow smile spread across her lips, and then, without another word, she reached into her purse and pulled out a set of car keys. Nick laughed. She still had them. The keys to the charger. Evelyn smirked, twirling them between her fingers. You think this old thing still has a few miles left in her? Nick's smile widened. You tell me. Evelyn considered him for a moment. Then she pushed back from the table, grabbed her coat, and stood. Nick followed. Together, they stepped. Out onto the California coast, the ocean stretching wide before them, the charger gleaming under the setting sun. It had taken them a lifetime to get here. But now, time didn't matter anymore, because this time, they weren't running away. They were running toward something. Toward whatever came next. Evelyn unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat. Nick climbed in beside her. She turned the key. The engine roared to life. And together, they drove. The 1969 Dodge Charger cut through the coastal highway, its engine humming like a song lost in time. The golden sunlight stretched long shadows across the pavement as the ocean glittered to their right, endless and free. Nick Dawson sat in the passenger seat, his fingers resting against the window frame. The scent of salt filled the air, blending with the leather of the car's interior. Beside him, Evelyn Monroe gripped the wheel, her hair catching the wind, her lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. For the first time in his life, Nick wasn't chasing something. He had found it. Her. They had been driving for hours, but neither of them had asked where they were going, because for once, the destination didn't matter. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Evelyn pulled off onto a small overlook by the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, waves, crashing far below. She killed the engine, but neither of them moved right away. Nick finally exhaled, running a hand over his face. I still can't believe this is real. Evelyn chuckled softly. You and me both. She turned, resting an elbow against the back of the seat, her gaze studying him like she was trying to piece together the impossible path that had brought them here. Then, after a long moment, she said, I thought about you. More times than I can count. Nick's throat tightened. I never stopped thinking about you. Evelyn smiled, but there was something wistful in it. I used to wonder if I had imagined you. If you had just been a dream that pulled me toward something better. Nick swallowed hard. I wasn't a dream, Ev. Evelyn studied him for a moment longer, then looked back out at the ocean. I know that now. Her voice was softer, filled with a lifetime of longing. Nick reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter, the one she had written him decades ago, before either of them had truly understood what it meant. He placed it on the dashboard between them. I kept it, he murmured. Evelyn stared at it for a moment, her fingers trailing over the aged paper. Then she let out a quiet laugh. Guess time really isn't as straight as we think it is, huh? Nick chuckled. Not for us, at least. Evelyn exhaled, shaking her head. I still don't understand how any of this happened. How you found me. How we ended up back here, in this car, after all these years. Nick looked at her, his chest tightening. It doesn't matter how, he said. All that matters is that we did. Evelyn met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. A lifetime of roads not taken, a love that time itself had tried to erase, and yet here they were, together. The sky had darkened to a deep, rich blue, the stars flickering to life above them. Evelyn leaned back against the seat, fingers tapping idly against the steering wheel. So, Dawson, she said, smirking. What's next? Nick smirked back. That depends. On what? He turned to her fully, his voice steady. Where do you want to go? Evelyn blinked, then let out a small laugh. You're really gonna leave it up to me? Nick shrugged. It's always been your choice, Ev. That's the whole point. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled. I guess it is, isn't it? She looked back at the open road ahead, tapping her fingers against the keys. Then, she turned the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, just like it always had. Nick grinned. Guess that means you're not done driving yet. Evelyn shot him a sideways glance, amusement dancing in her eyes. Not even close. And with that, she shifted into gear. The Charger rolled forward, its tires whispering against the pavement as it carried them toward whatever came next. Neither of them looked back, because for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, they weren't running away. They were driving toward something new, something that belonged to them. Together. As the road stretched out before them, endless and unwritten, Nick reached over and gently intertwined his fingers with hers. Evelyn glanced at him, eyes soft, lips curving into a smile. She squeezed his hand, and then they disappeared into the night. Years later, an old 1969 Dodge Charger sat parked on a quiet street in a small coastal town. The paint was still faded in places, but the engine still purred like a lion when it came to life. A young man, no older than 20, ran a hand over the hood, eyes full of curiosity. How long have you had this car? Beside him, a woman, her hair streaked with silver but her eyes still full of fire, smirked. Longer than you've been alive, kid, the young man chuckled. And you still drive it? The woman exchanged a glance with the man standing next to her, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, a familiar smirk on his lips. Evelyn Monroe shrugged. Some roads, she said. You never stop driving. Nick Dawson grinned. You ready? Evelyn tossed him the keys. Nick caught them effortlessly, and with one last knowing glance, they climbed into the Charger. The engine roared to life. And just like that, they were gone. And that, my friends, is the story of a poor mechanic, a lost love, and a secret billionaire who set everything in motion. A journey that proves some roads never truly end. They just lead us to where we were meant to be all along. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you enjoyed this ride through time, love, and destiny, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are plenty more incredible stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss them. Thank you for watching, for supporting this journey, and for being part of this amazing community. Until next time, keep chasing the roads that call to you. See you in the next one.